my guest today is Aaron Gunn, who is running for MP of North Island, Powell River, west coast of British Columbia, for the Conservative Party, hoping to bring common sense back to Canadian politics. Obviously, you're supporting Pierre Poilievre on his run. So I want to start with why, Aaron, because we were just chatting backstage and I was like, I love that you're running. I wish more people like you from outside of politics would enter politics, but I completely understand why they don't. I mean, if you were to ask me, do you want to run for office? I'd say, hell no. Why would I do that? It sounds terrible because of what you have to go through on the campaign trail and then live in the public eye and deal with the bureaucracy, which I know you're dealing with right now. So I want to start there. Why are you running? What convinced you to take this step?
Well, I think it almost goes back to the title of the little presentation and talk we have here is just as a normal everyday Canadian citizen, I was frustrated and am frustrated in the direction this country is going. I think we've been walking off a fiscal and cultural cliff over the past 8 years. And, there's the old kind of cliche, be the change you want to see in the world. And it's at a certain point to bring common sense back to Canada, you need to elect better politicians. And the other big reason for me was simply that the turning point for me is when Pierre Poilievre became leader of the party. He's someone who I think has the political courage, he's got the intellectual capacity, and also just the kind of the brazen tenacity, I think, has what it takes to defeat Trudeau. And not only defeat Trudeau, but make meaningful, lasting change to Canada and that will reverberate for years and decades to come. So if I could be a part of that, if I could help make that happen, if I can flip a couple seats on Vancouver Island Blue that could make the difference, then I think I just really kind of felt the calling that was somewhere where I could make a difference.
I got to ask how big of a job that is for you, right? Running North Island, Powell River. Mm-hmm. What's that going to be like in terms of challenge?
Well, the Conservatives lost it by 3.5% to the NDP, so it's one of the 20 closest ridings in the country. It's a riding where the Conservatives lost by less than the PPC vote, so it's definitely probably you'd consider it, the little political strategists in Ottawa would have it in column one of seats that the party would like to pick up. Pierre's doing incredible in the polls right now. As someone who's spent my entire life on Vancouver Island, I'm taking nothing for granted because that piece of real estate occasionally does weird things politically and goes in the opposite direction of the rest of the country. But since moving up to Campbell River from Victoria, I absolutely love it up there. It's beautiful. There seems to be a lot of common sense. I don't know how it's not conservative already. And so it's an exciting challenge for me. It's a resource-based community. We're actually having challenges in the mining space. The one mine in Vancouver Island just closed or got put into care and maintenance. Forestry, aquaculture. So it's a really cool place to live, and I'm excited to take on the challenge. It's a big riding, though. It stretches all the way from Comox to Port Hardy, and then also includes Powell River here on the mainland.
Now, if the Conservatives were to take office at the next election, what's your take on the low-hanging fruit that they could action right away? Twice at this conference, we've had the former PM Harper speak and join us on stage. We invited him because this is a resource conference, and he stewarded this country through the 2008 financial crisis, which we got through with a healthier balance sheet than any other G7 nation. A lot of people don't know that about Canada, but we did it by leveraging our resource economy, right? If we were to see a shift in federal politics, God willing, what's some low-hanging fruit that you would expect to change near term?
Well, first, let me say I'm glad you brought up Harper because you have an example where we had an actual kind of serious adult person running the country. Now we're viewed as it's like a clown show. And I tell you, every week you think it can't get worse and then something else happens. And so I think the low-hanging fruit, look, and I've chatted with Pierre about this, but the inflationary deficits that Trudeau has been running, I think we entered into this during COVID, kind of this cultural moment where no one critiqued any amount of federal government spending. It was kind of like money grew on trees, and we just got the money printers fired up. And the other thing is, I don't know what we got with any of this money. I mean, the size of the federal bureaucracy has exploded, and yet federal services take longer, and the outcomes are worse. So I think we need to rein that in. We need to cut the waste. We need to balance the budget. And then we need to turn this country into a resource superpower. I mean, I think this is probably one of the most poorly managed first world countries in the world. I think we should be one of the wealthiest countries of the world, whether it's mining or oil and gas, or any of the other great resource industries. So kind of to open up Canada to the world and get our resources to markets overseas. I know Trans Mountain Pipeline here is supposed to go online pretty quick, Coastal GasLink pipeline, but we've missed we've missed a big opportunity on LNG, but hopefully it's not too late to ramp that up as well.
Can I ask you what you think the role of federal leadership in a country like Canada should be? And I look at the federal creep into the provinces over the last 6-8 years. This is really amplified, where federal policy is creeping and stepping on the toes of what should be provincial decisions. And this is from a constitutional standpoint. And in response to this, we're seeing acts like the Alberta Sovereignty Act, the Saskatchewan First Act, and the premiers are saying, give us the power back, right? Now, the media has responded to these pieces of legislation by demonizing Danielle Smith and saying this is some kind of like they're trying to emancipate themselves from Canada. Not the case at all. As far as I understand it, they're trying to reclaim their present day constitutional rights. So my take is that the federal government's job is to clear the path and then stay out of the way. Clear the path for the provinces to do business how they see fit and let them decide. And if they want to go NDP socialist, great, do your thing. If you want to go pro-business, do your thing. But the federal position should be just clear the way and let the provinces decide. But what's your take?
Yeah, I think there's two things there. I would say the first is an even larger overarching question about, a lot of people ask me to say, what does the government need to do? We need the solution. Like, what is your solution? And I think in most cases, it's not the government that's the solution. Government is actually the problem in the first place, and government just needs to get out of the way and allow entrepreneurs and hardworking Canadians to take control of their future and build the country that they built in the first place. The second question about jurisdiction, how the system's supposed to work is you're supposed to have a Supreme Court that is supposed to safeguard that separation of powers. I could talk about some of the court decisions that I think have been and who we've appointed to the bench. But, like Bill C-69, which was a horrible piece of legislation that basically, they called it the No More Pipelines Bill. It could regulate basically any project that produced carbon emissions, even though the development of resources is quite clearly in our Constitution under provincial jurisdiction. But that was finally ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court because premiers like Danielle Smith and Scott Moe in Saskatchewan and Blaine Higgs in New Brunswick, not the premier here in BC, it should be noted. Even the premier of Quebec was against it. So I think it's important to safeguard that, because I think the government closest to the people governs best. So, local government better than provincial government better than federal government. Good luck getting your voice heard here in Vancouver at the decision-making tables in Ottawa. So I think we just need to keep making sure we empower provinces. The federal government takes as much of a hands-off approach as possible and lets Canadians go to work.
Can you touch on the order a little bit? We look at a lot of the power, the voting power comes from the east. We know this, right? And that's where the people are. It makes sense. A lot of the wealth comes from the center of the country, right? And a lot of imbalance in Canada, I think, is a cause of that, right? And we have transfer payments moving from countries like Alberta, from oil revenues, to places like Quebec, where they have a moratorium on oil and gas exploration, but they're happy to take the dollars. Can you see any resolution to that imbalance, where we have the wealth coming from one part of the country and the decision-making coming from a disconnected other parts, and there's constantly conflict between the two?
Yeah, I think the first part of that is just is from a communications perspective to better articulate to other parts of the country that a lot of the wealth that they're getting and the transfer payments they're getting are coming from, for example, the oil and gas industry out in Western Canada. And for a certain part of the country, there's a language barrier there that helps stifles it. But look, I think from a communications perspective, one of the biggest challenges in Canada, and it goes back to your original question about common sense, has been the media. Before I became the Conservative Party Canada, I've been making documentaries, lots on these resource industries, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's forestry. And the amount of times I'm having to tell part of the story that's been completely ignored by the CBC, which has a budget of over $1 billion that taxpayers are paying for, or any of the other mainstream outlets is quite bewildering. So I think there's unfortunately too many Canadians in urban centers and out east that are using the wood to build their homes and putting the gasoline into their gas tank and maybe not understanding how it's actually getting to them, or going. It's magical, right? It just manifests itself. Or, getting all the benefits from the social safety net we have here in Canada and not maybe appreciating who's paying for it all. So I think there's a bit of just a communications challenge there. But I'll give you another example. The Energy East pipeline, which was one of the most, no-brainer pipelines imaginable, is mainly converting existing pieces of infrastructure to move oil from the west, from Alberta, from Saskatchewan, to existing refineries, primarily in New Brunswick. The federal government basically, it ended up being abandoned. The federal government wasn't going to support it because of a certain amount of political opposition from Quebec. But New Brunswick was probably the loudest province in support of that project. New Brunswick's premier, Blaine Higgs, who used to work for Irving, was one of the loudest proponents of that project. So there's a good example where, the West would have benefited, the East would have benefited. And yeah, there was political opposition in Quebec to an extent, but what was really missing, I think, was political leadership. No one had the political courage to take it on and champion it. And I actually, I've got a lot of faith in everyday Canadians, but if no one's making the case to them and all they're hearing is the same kind of apocalyptic narratives from the media, then it's hard to get anywhere and make any traction.
And it's become tougher and tougher to raise independent media voices in Canada. And there's been an obscene amount of subsidies flowing to a very small number of mainstream media organizations in Canada. And the criteria to receive these funds excludes any sector-specific or therefore small independent media voices. And so we're financing a lot of the legacy general media in Canada. And a lot of this has been under the guise of we need to digitize Canada's media, bring them up to speed. And, media's been suffering. It's been a tough business. We need to support this industry with some cash. And that argument would have made sense to me in 1999, right? But it's 2024. They haven't figured out how to digitize their business yet. No amount of money is going to figure that out. What's your take on media censorship and the direction that is taking in Canada, specifically when it comes to small independent voices like yourself, by the way? And everybody should check out Aaron Gunn's YouTube channel. It's some of the best journalism in Canada, full stop. But what's your take, Aaron?
Well, look, I think this gets to a bigger issue, whether it's the attempt by the Trudeau government to basically buy off the media, whether it's something called Bill C-11, which is to give the federal government through the CRTC control over your YouTube and social media algorithms, whether it's Bill C-18, which anyone might have noticed, all of a sudden news disappeared off of Facebook and Instagram. It's all about the federal government wanting to retake control of what's known as the Overton window. So the views and ideas that are allowed to be socially acceptable and discussed in society. And for a period of time, especially through broadcast news, a small group of individuals, small group of companies were able to kind of control that Overton window. And the internet has changed that dramatically because people can seek out additional views and opinions and viewpoints. And that hasn't been, I think, the Trudeau, and including from other countries like the United States. And I think the Trudeau government doesn't like that. They want to try to reestablish, you'll see Pierre refer to them as the gatekeepers, to kind of control what they're trying to do with the subsidization of media and Bill C-11 and Bill C-18 is to control what Canadians think by controlling what they see. So they're not going to go and just ban everything so you can't, they're going to throw you in jail or it's not on the internet, but they're going to try to manipulate the algorithms. They're going to subsidize some media and give them billions of dollars and give no money to other upstart independent media because they want to elevate voices that support them and reinforce their narrative of the country and try to ostracize and hide or limit the exposure of those who are independent or who stand up against them.
I have to ask you to break down Bill C-18 for me a little bit. As you mentioned, this is the reason we suddenly no longer see small independent Canadian media voices on social media. I live in Squamish. It's 45 minutes north of where we're at. In Squamish, there's a little publication called the Squamish Chief. They've been around forever. They were prints back in the day. They obviously digitized. But a media company at that scale, they're very small, lives and dies on their social media engagement. When I go to their social media pages today, it says this content can no longer be viewed in Canada. Mm-hmm. Nobody outside of Canada wants to read the Squamish Chief. Nobody outside of Squamish wants to read the Squamish Chief, right? So they just completely chop the legs off. This conference, for example, we spend a lot of money on marketing. I mean, that's how you get 9,000 people through a door. You spend a fair amount of money. We've always marketed with the Daily Hive, right? A small, independent, Vancouver-born media company, and they've only been around for like 8-9 years. You know, they were Van City Buzz 9 years ago. Now they're the Daily Hive. I couldn't spend any money with them this year. I had to cut them out of the marketing budget because they live and die on their social media engagement, and without that, they've got nothing. And so we've just crushed what was a very successful Canadian success story. You know, this is a great little media company, great distribution, great respect, and we just handcuffed them and destroyed this. So I need you to break this down for me, the motivation behind C18 and what exactly this means, because I don't think it's getting the attention that it deserves.
Yeah, C18 isn't that complicated. I mean, basically what the government was trying to do is they had their same kind of government-approved media that they wanted to further put in their back pocket by giving a whole bunch of free money to. But in order to do it this time, instead of just printing money, they basically tried to shake down the big tech companies, and mainly Facebook and Google. And what you saw with Facebook is they basically said, okay, Facebook, we're going to pass this law, and you have to give X amount of dollars to government-approved media every time their stories are shared on your platform, which I found so ridiculous, because someone who's in the quasi-media space, I mean, I want my stuff to be shared on Facebook and Instagram. That's actually a benefit to me. That's more exposure for you. If they go to your website, that's more exposure for people that are advertising on your website, as you may have been doing with the Daily Hive. So of course these media companies were okay to go along with it because they're like more money for us. But then Facebook basically said, people aren't using our platform primarily for this reason, and we don't want to set a precedent for the United States and other countries where we're being basically forced to pay companies for a service that we're providing to them for free, essentially. So they said, if you're going to make us do this, then we're not going to allow any link sharing on our platform at all. And the unfortunate thing is some of the smaller media outlets, whether they were government approved or not, there's media companies that were totally against this bill, but they're now still banned on Facebook because Facebook said in order to comply with the law, we'd basically be forced, we'd be blackmailed, we'd be basically, it's a shakedown to force to give money, and we're not going to abide by it, so we're just going to ban all media content altogether.
Because asking Facebook to pay media companies who publish on their platform, as far as I understand, is just a fundamental misunderstanding of what social media is. It's a marketing tool. So if I'm a publisher, right, I'm fortunate to have that as one of my marketing tools, to give people a taste of what I'm publishing and then drive them back to my website.
Oh, media companies will pay to have their stuff promoted on social media. It's usually the opposite direction.
It's completely backwards. Which is why I have to assume I'm missing something here, because it's completely backwards. And we do. If we want to get our stories further coverage on social, we pay to promote that and buy that coverage. That's typically how media works. Facebook's never going to pay me. And if they did, well, guess what? Like, my kids are all suddenly media companies. Like, everyone I know is going to be a media company and try to get some cash in their hand. It makes absolutely no sense.
No, it's just a shakedown. It's as simple as the government looking at the tech companies making a lot of money through advertising, the legacy media losing money, and the government saying, okay, well, we're just going to pass legislation that forces a successful group of entrepreneurs X to pay unsuccessful group of legacy media companies Y, and thinking that there'd be no consequences. The other thing is that Facebook completely telegraphed what they were going to do. Like, they told the government for months, this is what we're going to do if you pass the legislation, and they passed it anyways. So it's...
is unwinding this a possibility?
Yeah, I think you just repeal bill, like so much of the Trudeau government, unfortunately. I mean, I know Pierre and the party is going to be rolling out plans, but a lot of the solution is to repeal all of the disastrous legislation that the Trudeau government has passed, whether it's the anti-resource stuff like Bill C-69, whether it's things like Bill C-18, C-11 on free speech, whether it's just the reckless spending to unprecedented levels, or whether it's some of this giving everybody bail and nobody jail kind of approach to criminal justice. So there's no shortage of things that need to happen. I think it'll be a very busy first 6 months of a Pierre Poilievre government.
I hope so. Okay, now I know we're short on time. I thought we had 30. Turns out we had 20, so we're running tight. Given that we spent so much time on C-18, I think it's relevant to touch on Bill C-11. If you could explain exactly what that bill is intended for and what it's done to the Canadian media landscape for podcasters like me and YouTubers like you.
Yeah, really quickly, C-11. What the federal government is arguing is they want to promote Canadian content. What's happening in reality is the CRTC, which kind of regulates broadcast media. This again goes back to controlling the Overton window. They want it to basically regulate the internet as well. What that means is that when you go to like your YouTube homepage, the videos that you see right now are determined by YouTube's algorithm. They're trying to show you content that you're likely to see based on your past choices. The federal government wants to go in there and be able to manipulate it. In their view, to promote Canadian content, what that will probably mean is promote government-approved Canadian content, so that instead of seeing independent voices, instead of seeing things like interviews from Joe Rogan, let's say, you'll just see clips from the CBC on your YouTube homepage. And if you're someone that really is interested in politics, you'll still be able to go digging and find it. But 90% of people in this country probably are going to watch whatever's on their homepage when they go to YouTube. So the government, that is their goal to do it. Just hopefully, because government works pretty slow, that won't really be coming into effect before the next election, and we can just get rid of the bill altogether.
All right, thank you, Aaron. I wanted to spend a decent amount of our time on that media piece because I think it's so important. We need to be able to argue. I mean, let's just be honest. That's what free speech is. A month ago, I had former General Wesley Clark on my podcast. He's the former commander of NATO. And I was asking him, as a American Army general, what's your take on the civil unrest that's spreading through the United States? Does this concern you? And the trajectory of it, and how the rest of the world is looking at America as kind of a dumpster fire right now in terms of cultural division. And he said, look, that's exactly what democracy is. Democracy is an argument, all right? We're allowed to do this here. We're allowed to do this here in Canada. It's very important that we can protest if we want to, and that we can raise our voices and disagree if we feel like we do. Okay, I want to thank you, Aaron, for joining me on stage today. Best of luck in your campaign and the federal race as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.